AAMIG was invited to a Chatham House meeting on November the 7th last year to be part of a discussion on emerging infectious diseases. I would now like to introduce Dr. Steven Phillips. Steven is the head of this project in Chatham House. Steven is a former medical director for ExxonMobil.
What Bill probably didn't say is that it was no accident that he was invited to Chatham House. And the purpose, as you'll see in this presentation of the Chatham House meeting, was to get this key intersection going between multi-stakeholders that had a hand in the issue, but nobody really owned it. And the issue basically is the title of this presentation. What is the extractive industry role in driving risk management around infectious diseases in tropical hotspots around the world where they operate. Now, our focus now is Africa. My intent here, very briefly, is to run through a PowerPoint and be relevant to AAMIG membership. And at the end of it, I'll ask Dr. Neri to say a few words and then open it up for questions. I think the basic issue with this whole study that I'm going to lay out is how to leverage mining industry interests in Africa, and in this particular study in Katanga, DRC. Chatham House proceedings were sponsored by a significant work stream within USAID that has a 5-year lifespan looking at this issue, and now approaching real questions about where the rubber hits the road in terms of getting real-world responses and mitigation measures in this area. There's also a lot of really good laboratory work, research, academic work, capacity development, etc. So this is what I'm about to describe is a very modest, but I would say very important part of the overall approach. It's really a 3-part narrative of why the extractive industry is potentially involved and concerned. First, there's really important and elegant new science. About 5 years ago, scientists studied the known history of new emerging infections throughout the world. And on analysis, they realized that the preponderance, about 60% of new EIDs, emerging infectious diseases, emerged in tropical hotspots by jumping from animals to humans. And some of that was through domesticated animals and some through wild animals. That's point number one. Point number two of the logic, cascading logic, is that the extractive industry, just by virtue of what it does and how it does it in these remote, exotic, sometimes tropical environments, there are land use changes, just inevitably. And the hypothesis is that land use changes that put humans into proximate relationship with animals that previously did not exist, as well as cause some ecosystem changes in native flora and fauna, are a likely contributor to the risk of this leap occurring, the spillover from animals to humans, number one. And not only is the extractive industry potentially conferring risk, but they're also deriving risk at the same time. So it's not a unilateral pathway, it's really a bilateral vector. And the third of all, something that we actually validated is that through no fault of the mining industry or any other related industry, they were not aware of this issue because it was, like most macro issues, until the communication strategy and plan for awareness is laid out in a coherent and strategic way, except for lay media and scientific articles and people next door that you may know, there's not a systematic way of understanding the potential issue. It's a global issue, and we're Africa-centric here for all kinds of good reasons, but just to make you aware that this, in terms of scientific hotspots, really covers the globe. And I won't go over that, but this is not just an African issue. Within Africa, it's predominantly a Congo Basin, West African issue, just in terms of the hypotheses. Chatham House essentially was asked to get closer to the extractive industry and define the base case of what was your thinking about this issue. And this is not going to be any surprise to you guys in the room, but the mining industry especially has a very strong risk management culture, system, and tools that you apply daily in all kinds of realms. The question facing the industry on this issue is, where does this sit on the risk inventory? The approach is pretty straightforward. You basically, once something enters your risk inventory, there are standard ways of scenario planning and then mapping probability severity, and then mapping potential mitigation measures. So there are established methods. To me, the most intriguing thing is if you buy the why and the what, then the question is how. And this how will not be in the textbooks. It won't be discussed in your circles, whether corporate or in the field. But in my experience, it's going to take champions. A few people that raise their right hand. One of them is Bill. Another one I'll introduce in a moment, Miles. But people who actually think that this is a real issue and see a clear mental roadmap to how it might be approached and a clear sense of responsibility. And those champions who actually then understand the mining industry are the levers for change. That's what you really need. This is not something that can be, I think, prescriptive or done from the outside. It's got to have true substantive internal drive. And then there's a whole bunch of players that are willing to help. And many of them schematically are in this room, but they're also, as this thing grows, I think there are other players that are willing to help. But there's a list of potential technical, strategic, financial assistance, and a lot of that, I think, potentially could kick in with mining industry lead. So you won't be surprised that industry leaders had a bunch of questions, and legitimate questions, hard-nosed, concrete and pragmatic questions. What's the strength of the science case for action? What's the industry value proposition for involvement? And then very importantly, they were presented with a lot of scientific data. All of you guys, I think, appropriately have the general good in mind, but you really care about your own sites. You really want to do risk mapping. Where are you in the hot zone? And also, tangibly, what is it that you're being asked to do? Roundtable summarized all this. What we heard from just about all players is, let's move on to pilot testing some really key hypotheses, and let's get some data on the ground. And I'll elaborate on what that means, but through the input of champions, we landed on developing the project that I'll discuss briefly, which is the Katanga Province DRC pilot, with the intention of scaling certainly through the copper belt, but it's also scalable way beyond to not only African hot zones, but also the other hot zones you saw. So the project aims are to look at 3 dimensions of adding value and mitigating risk at the ground level in Katanga Province, probably involving about 4 mines. They're really good tools, largely developed by and through USAID technical consultants that have not been adequately tested, and their risk assessment instruments and their audit instruments. And not only do the instruments need to be tested, but you guys are very aware that systems need to be tested. This project is in the final planning stages. It's not yet green light, but just to still let you know, so we can't disclose all parameters, but I think we're very optimistic. It will have a very, very well-managed project structure with local partners and global partners. I think it's going to be the best of both worlds. 4 mining companies that will provide logistical support and local introductions. And then we're very privileged and lucky to have International SOS, which is a major global medical services provider, but in this case has had local relationship with these most of these mining companies, not all involved. And the goal is to validate a transportable, scalable EID risk management and incident response system. It's to be a unique partnership. It ain't all that easy to put together international and local players in a way that shared value is derived and that the product fits the ambition. And so we're working hard on making this partnership an operational partnership that actually works together to get results. Second, it will address the fundamental hypothesis, which is, can proactive approaches to EID risk mitigation provide value to mining companies? And let me just emphasize that, because there's going to be lots of shared value here. So let me stop there and introduce Dr. Miles Neri, who's the Global Medical Director for International SOS. He'll describe a bit his view of this project, and then we'll open it up for general questions. Miles?
I won't take up too much of it. Really, for someone who's been involved in providing medical services and helping the extractive industry for more than 20 years with the International SOS Group, I can't personally emphasize the importance of this very unique work. Thanks to USAID and a tremendous effort and expenditure in the science of this world, in the global health security, in trying to work out what are the drivers of these problems. You know, we have tools now available. We have an ability, I think, to actually, through our presence in countries where the medical infrastructure is generally very poor, and where, you know, as companies we're faced with having to do something, so it's not often that we've got a choice. Now there are tools available. So I think really, in very simple terms, the project that Steven has been talking about today, that AAMIG has generously assisted us in raising an awareness, is very tangible. It's quite simple, and you know, it's something that a mining company and extractive industry in general can't do much about themselves, but conversely, we can't do much about it in these areas without your assistance. And so I think we're really talking about the true collaboration between the industry, the local health infrastructures of the countries we work in, and you know, the science that's available to us as mankind, basically. So we've chosen a pilot project with Bill's involvement in the copper belt in the Congo. He's really been a great driver on behalf of it to help raise this awareness and get the project momentum going. USAID are very enthusiastic and see this as a great initiative, and we think it's achievable in a pretty short space of time. So really the idea today was to tell you that the project's well advanced. We think we've conceptualized it correctly, and really the idea today was to talk to you as an industry, because no, you're not all in the Congo, but I think you are seeing that this problem is a universal problem. And if the pilot program is valuable in the Congo in the next 6 months, it's something that is absolutely able to be translated and delivered in Liberia and Ghana and all of West Africa, where there are similar problems. So it's a universal issue, and that's one we're pretty excited to get it going.